15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho ho and a bottle of fun, with National Treasure's interviews. The video series is good, isn't it, that one? I thought
That's
of that this
my
morning.
favourite one. That's
I thought
good.
of that on the way to work this morning. I went, I wish we were doing pirates this week, because I'll forget it. But welcome to National Treasure's Interviews, the interview video series by me, Will Duggan, and Laura Lex, the spin-off, not Laura, the interview series of the podcast National Treasures that Laura and I host, having nice days out around the country. That's off the menu at the minute. It's like yesterday's beef, no longer able to be sold, so we have bought today's beef, and it's virtual beef, it's internet beef. Not like two rappers having a fight, this is beef Kobe steak. Welcome. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Will. Wow, you really went for that one today. That was a lot.
I've really eased into it as the weeks have continued.
But what I think is funny, though, is that, yes, you have, but this is the second video we're putting out. So chronologically, you're going to get really good for a week and then go back to being joddery.
Let's do another one.
No.
Hi guys. It's interview time now. How are you today, Laura?
I'm all right. I've got a bit of a headache and I haven't achieved as much as I should have done, but it's all right, isn't it? I just ate a big handful of Haribo to make sure I had enough energy to do this. Boo-boo!
I edited a recipe today. I had satay chicken noodles. The last time we had it, I thought, there's not enough spice in this. There's too much coconut in this. Played with the format. I've made Citizen Kane in noodles.
Well, that's more than I've done. That's a lot more than I've done. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this mainly, is what my day has been. So let's get on with this. Our guest today, we're excited about this because we've timed our chat to coincide with their wonderful festival. So, here to talk about all things Viking, and in particular the JORVIK Centre in York, can I please welcome to your screens Dr. Chris Tuckley. Yay. Hello.
Hi there. Hi, Will. Hi, Laura.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us. I love it when we have a doctor on. It makes it feel like we're very important.
You are very important, absolutely.
Oh, this is going swimmingly.
You can come back. So why Vikings, and why are you a doctor of Vikings?
Well, I've got a PhD from the University of Leeds, and it was in medieval studies, but it wasn't particularly focused on Vikings. I've been involved with Vikings since 2004 when I started working at the JORVIK Viking Centre, when I was working initially in the shop there. But no, I didn't start out with a particular interest in Vikings. I just sort of fell into it, really.
Okay, so the JORVIK Centre, it's in York, where did the Vikings all live up north? Did any of them come down south?
They got all over, really. They didn't keep to one place. In fact, they sort of spread out and spread themselves around quite a lot. They certainly settled in the north and east of England. So often when we think of Viking England specifically, we think of the Danelaw region. And that's the area where they sort of moved in and settled down. But they got everywhere.
JORVIK, is that how it's pronounced, or is it pronounced Jorvik? It is Jorvik.
No, you're quite right, Jorvik, yeah.
Is that where the word York comes from? Are they from the same root? Because it's spelled, so, I mean, viewers will have seen the title of the video, but it's spelled Jorvic.
Yeah, we spell it V-I-K.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, okay. And
you'll notice from the title of the video, there's a K in that.
I don't title the things.
And I can spell Jorvik.
Okay. So what does that mean? What does Jorvik mean?
Well, you're quite right that is the root of the name York. So the Romans called the city Iberacum. So the Romans founded the city as a sort of a legionary fortress and colonia attached to it. And then we've got the sort of the early medieval period when it's known as Jofavik. And that gets contracted down. We have an invasion by a Viking great army, and they capture the city in 866. And the city really takes much of its modern shape from the Viking period, and they called it Jorvik. So that's the Old Norse name for the city of York. And then it gets, again, shortened down to just York, which is the name, obviously, by which it's known today.
And
I just really enjoyed that I was just saying that's great. Sorry, but I sort of mumbled it because I didn't want to ruin the flow of the interview. But by doing it quite mumbly, I have.
Yeah.
Laura, carry on.
No, it's all right. I was going to say something dumb that, well, I'm always saying dumb things on this, but it surprises me how old the Romans are. Like, the fact that the Vikings came after the Romans feels weird to me.
Seems wrong, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. And actually, I think it would be useful to sort of canvass public opinion and public knowledge on what do people think about the Vikings before they come and visit us at Jorvik. And it was done actually before Jorvik opened for the first time. There was a questionnaire done. I've never seen the results of it, not in full. But so this is back in the 70s and 80s when people were visiting the Coppergate Dig, which is where Jorvik now stands. And the impression that was, it seemed that a lot of people were under the impression that the Vikings come before the Romans in chronological terms.
The word Viking, Chris, what does it
Yes.
mean? Where does it come from? Like, would these people have called themselves the Vikings?
No, it's a very good question. They almost certainly wouldn't have called themselves Vikings. And it seems that in the period that we're talking about, so I guess anywhere from the 8th century up to the 11th century, the term Viking seems to have had pejorative connotations, and it seems to be connected with piracy and sort of going overseas and
Ripping off DVDs.
and raiding and ripping off DVDs and exactly that kind of carry on. But it entered the English language in the 19th century. That's when it entered common parlance. But almost certainly the people that we now refer to as the Vikings, or the people we refer to at Jorvik as the Vikings, which is our shorthand for the men, women and children who were knocking around in York and in the wider Viking world in the 10th century. That's the term that we now use as a kind of a loose catch-all term. They almost certainly wouldn't have called themselves Vikings in that period. What they would have called themselves, that's a bit more difficult to say. But a lot of these terms have been interchangeable over the years. Norseman, Norman, Viking, Viking. They've all been bandied around, sometimes fairly carelessly. But generally now, when we talk about the Viking period in England, and these things are always somewhat arbitrary, we tend to say, well, the Viking period begins in the year 793 with the attack on Holy Island, Lindisfarne, and it ends in the year 1066 with the battles that happened in that year, which saw the last great Viking invasion force comprehensively defeated and smashed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So that, again, that's one way of marking out this period. But there's a great deal of slippage if you're thinking about the movements of peoples, travel, migration, trade, exploration. It doesn't sit neatly within those parameters, and nor do people sit neatly within those parameters either. I think that's something we increasingly appreciate, is that there's always movement of people.
Yeah. We have this image of Vikings coming over in longships and their raiding parties of hulky men who come here and rape and pillage, etc., etc. But so were there ships coming over with whole families coming over, or did the descendants of Vikings tend to be wives that had been found here, or did wives get brought along? How did that work?
Well, if we're thinking about something like the Viking Great Army, so this is the army that came over in the 860s from Scandinavia and spent the next decade campaigning around the British Isles. Archaeological evidence has been looked at very closely of particularly at sites where we know that the Great Army was encamped, and it seems that as well as the men that you would expect to form the fighting force of the Viking Great Army, as well as men being part of this Great Army, there seem to have been women and children along as well. That's borne out by some of the artifact evidence that comes from these sites. So we think that, yes, to an extent we can think of the Viking Great Army as being a bunch of big men out for a fight. But again, when you look at the archaeological evidence they've left behind, it seems almost like the Great Army was more like an entire town on the move. And actually, that's, you know, when it moves into York, that's when we begin to see the beginnings of York as an urban space and as a town. So in a sense, the Great Army ushers York into existence as a town as we know it today.
Did they pick York because there was existing Roman infrastructure there, or is it a good hill? I don't know York very well.
You know York, it's a good hill, yeah.
Is it?
It's not hilly, no.
Right.
but you're quite right. It's, from a strategic point of view, it's quite easily defensible because it's where two rivers meet. So that's the River Foss and the River Ouse. So that's probably why the Romans established their fortress there in the 1st century. And that's probably what made it an important site thereafter.
Yeah, okay.
And it's the seat of an archbishop as well in the early medieval period. So there's a certain amount of infrastructure there and defences, as you mentioned. So probably when the Vikings popped up, much of the Roman fortifications would probably have been a lot more visible than they are now.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still see standing Roman fabric in York today, but probably more of the walls would have been visible, for instance. So yeah, so defensible, strategically quite important. It's on the River Ouse, which leads into the Humber estuary. So it's like a port as well, effectively. And from there you can access the North Sea and the other river systems that take you into the heartlands of England. In 1066, there are 3 battles. There's the Battle of Fulford, which is just outside York, and that's rapidly followed by the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and then we have the Battle
which is where Chelsea play at home.
That's right.
What's that for?
It's a different Stamford Bridge, but when you Google it,
What?
you do get those
It's
those
not
sorts
the
of results
stadium?
as well.
You're
It's not the
kidding
stadium.
me.
No, it's just outside
Different
York.
Harold, different Stamford Bridge. Is anything real anymore?
Oh,
I'm afraid
everything
not.
we thought we knew about the world. So, Harold lost 5-0 at Stamford Bridge to good King
did,
Wenceslas.
That's right, but this is a different Harold. This is Harold Hardrada, who's a king of Norway, and he is a Viking. Effectively, he's had a long and illustrious Viking career that comes to a horrible end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So he invades. He wants to press his claim to the English throne, but he dies in battle at Stamford Bridge, and it's the forces led by your friend Harold Godwinson. Who triumph at Stamford Bridge, but then they have to quickly march down south to fight William, Duke of Normandy, and that's
Hastings.
At Hastings, yeah, and I think that's less than 3 weeks later. So it's possibly the effect of having to march rapidly up north to deal with this Viking invasion, and then quickly turn around, possibly somewhat depleted and weakened after fighting Harold Hardrada.
A question about Viking religion, the mythology. So, did the Vikings, we'll call them the Vikings, did they actually believe in physical versions of God, the gods, in the way that there are some Christians who believe that Adam and Eve is real? Did the Vikings believe that there was an actual Thor and Odin? Because it all seems like this tree of life, it's very provable to go, oh, it's not there. There's no hanging man with one eye. Were they meant as metaphor, or were they meant as reality?
Bloody hell, Will. That's a bit deep, isn't it?
That's a good question.
How are you meant to find that out from a load of pots in the floor?
He's got a PhD, Laura.
But
that's what it's all about.
Not in wanky philosophy, in real stuff.
No, it's not. It's probably just as wanky. Yeah. It's a good question, and the answer is probably a long and waffly one, and it's to do with the extent to which mythology, as it has come down to us, is the same thing as religion, as practiced by any given group of people, any given point in the past. We don't know a great deal about how the Vikings, as that group we've kind of vaguely identified, we don't know very much about how they practiced an organised religion, or if indeed they sort of had much of an organised religion. We can infer certain things, and we do have that body of writings which sketch out this very rich and vibrant mythology. But they were first written down by Christian scribes in the post-Viking period. Now, they're not just making things up, because we can refer back to our historical sources from the Viking period, and we can match up some of the episodes that they describe to some of the episodes depicted on, say, a stone carving from the Viking period. So the mythology does match up with mythology of the Viking period, but the extent to which that informs people's everyday belief systems and religious practices and rituals is debatable.
It's a question I wanted to ask, and I don't know if this is a bit of a personal question, so we can edit this out if it's too weird, but like, does it annoy you and other colleagues that work on the Vikings that
Yeah, it does. I don't think it's just now that it's happened either. I think this is partly the deal with looking back to the early medieval past. I think that this has been happening for a long time. People have looked back to it, particularly when you think of the rise of sort of nationalist politics, which isn't a modern phenomenon by any means. When you look back to how people are evoking the Viking past in the 19th century, you know, the period we're talking about, when we start using the word Viking, they're using it to think about and to describe things like, well, why is the British Empire like the British Empire? Well, it's because we're all great. We descended from Vikings, who are these great guys who get on their boat and go out and explore and take over a place, and that's why the British Empire is as great as it is. And that, it's not only in Britain that happens. You can find that happening in other places in Europe as well, as you get the rise of nationalism. So it's not a new thing, and people, I think, as they started to, having previously looked to the classical world, like you were describing, Will, and Greek mythology and Roman and Greek models, they wanted to find, well, what's special about us and our fellow countrymen and women. But of course, it's quite a short step then into the kind of the racist and the racially informed thinking that was going on simultaneously in that period. So unfortunately, there is an entanglement there, and it's not the case that you can easily step away from it when you're using that kind of terminology.
What were, and I know we're going to have to generalise massively here, but what were women up to in Viking society? Were they ever warriors? Were they farming, bringing up kids, washing, drying? Like, could they be in charge? What was the gender split like in this sort of period?
Again, a really good question, and one that's excited a lot of debate, and particularly recently when we think of the warrior woman grave from Birka in southern Sweden, and that's one that sort of hit the headlines a few years ago now. But it was a grave that had been known about for a long time, and it had always been interpreted as a warrior's grave because of the way that it was furnished. It was said that the sort of kit that came from the grave was appropriate for someone who was a military leader. And so for, I think, the best part of a century, it was, no one imagined that it would be anything other than a man in this grave, but it turned out that it was a woman in the grave. And so the evidence for that is fairly compelling. But I think, again, if you think about what I mentioned earlier with the Viking Great Army and the makeup of that, it seems that and again, it's not only the archaeological evidence. There is some historical evidence, contemporary historical evidence, for women and children travelling around as part of these great armies. So when these big invasion forces really get underway in the second half of the 9th century, women are travelling along as well. We have a skeleton. It's one of 2 complete skeletons that were found at Coppergate that's on display at Jorvik, and it's a woman's skeleton, and that's been subjected to a range of analyses, but there's an isotopic analysis, which I'll leave to cleverer people than myself to explain. It's demonstrated that she seems to have grown up in southwestern Norway, possibly in the far north of Scotland, but equally possibly in southwestern Norway. So it seems that she has at some point travelled a long distance, whether, you know, if only over land or, you know, from Scotland down into York or across the North Sea. So women are getting around. We have really strong women in the saga accounts who who are sometimes getting involved in some of the, you know, the fighting.
The Valkyries are women.
The Valkyries are women, but again, they are obviously they're mythological. So,
but they're not real, Will. So shut up.
Who's your favourite actual Viking that we're aware of?
I'm gonna say Eric Bloodaxe.
Good name.
Yeah, I'm possibly shouldn't go into too much detail on Eric Bloodaxe because he features in the questions that I've got lined up for you in the quiz that you're going to be doing.
We will accept that as your answer. Eric Bloodaxe. And you don't wish to do any more information.
Okay.
And speaking of those questions, you've got a quiz for us.
Now, Will, I think that this is a true or false quiz. So, would you like to go first or second in getting first choice of true or false?
Can I go first?
You may.
So question 1. Vikings wore horns on their helmets. False!
Will's going false. I'll take true then.
Well, I think really we should probably say false on this one because we've yet to find any hard evidence for Viking era helmets with horns, which is to say that nobody ever decided it was a good idea to wear horned headgear in the Viking period, but we are lacking hard evidence. And we do have 1 or 2 helmets that have survived from the Viking period, but sadly none of them have horns or wings or any of the other appendages that are sometimes associated with Viking.
Well, you did sort of say that it loosely ended the period, but you used the word loosely to suggest that maybe why would they have just stopped raiding altogether? I'm going to say false.
Well, I have to say true.
Okay, so Will, you're going for a sort of a hard cut-off in 1066 when Harold Hardrada is defeated, the Vikings sort of lose heart, and that's the end of that. Well, actually, it is false in that we know that the remainder Viking menace, although the ways in which it materialised, it didn't materialise in quite as spectacular a fashion as it had done in the sort of 9th and 10th and 11th centuries.
True or false, the last Viking king of York was Eric Bloodaxe.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking false. I'm thinking the last Viking king of York was Harold Hardrada, but he was at Stamford Bridge, which is London. And could you have got from York to Hastings in 3 weeks? I think yes. Quick march. Literally a quick march. So I'm going to say the last Viking king of York was Eric Bloodaxe. False.
And I'm going to say true because I think he was.
Well, what we say at Jorvik certainly is that Eric Bloodaxe was the last Viking king of an independent Viking kingdom of York. Yeah. So this is a Norwegian king, Eric Bloodaxe, who was booted out of Norway, travelled around a bit, and then managed to get himself set up as king in York. Okay, so go on, Laura.
True or false, Viking children play board games? I want to say true just because of how much I love board games. I'm going to say yes, they played some sort of gods made of marbles construction.
I am going to say false, but I know it's true because I own the Viking game that I bought at the JORVIK Centre.
Okay, well, I think that's very heroic of you, Will, to go for that option, because you're quite right. They did play board games. We have evidence for board games from the Coppergate excavation. We've got playing pieces, and we've got the remains of a playing board, and we think it was for a game called Nefertafel, which I think is the game that you're referring to, Will.
True or false? In the Artefacts Gallery at the JORVIK Viking Centre, the acronym LBT stands for Longboat Treasure.
That would make LGBT long gay boat treasure. True.
You're going true. I'm saying false. I think it stands for Lovely Bottom, Tanya. And that's what they said when they arrived in Angleland and saw the Saxons for the first time.
Well, I think, Laura, actually, you're possibly closer to the correct answer than you might think. Will, I'm disappointed. You visited Jorvik and you've not remembered that the LBT is the Lloyd's Bank turd. It's one of our most prized pieces in the Jorvik Gallery. So this is the largest fossilised human poo I think has ever been found anywhere. Coprolite, absolutely. You know the technical term for it.
Sorry, a fossilised poo. What are you eating
Coprolite.
that it's fossilised? How do you I'm so
it didn't
confused.
come out fossilised,
No,
Laura.
I know that, but poo just goes away. Why didn't it go away?
Well, I think it's because, like a lot of the environmental evidence at Coppergate and elsewhere in York, the soil conditions are so damp and peaty and oxygen poor that things that normally break down and rot away very quickly are actually locked in. They don't decay and break down. So the Lloyd's Bank turd wasn't found at Coppergate. It was found at the site of Lloyd's Bank. This was an earlier excavation. So when a new bank fort was being constructed, YAT, so York Archaeological Trust, in one of its first excavations, went and excavated a trench there. And this is one of the excavations that established how well preserved those Anglo-Scandinavian levels in York are.
So, Chris, I know that people obviously will know of the Vikings, but if they didn't, if the Vikings are completely passed someone by, what is some good literature, movies, paintings that they could look at to get a grounding in Vikings, other than, of course, the Viking Centre, York?
Other than the Viking Centre, okay, well, we have our annual Viking Festival, and obviously this year, because of the situation that we all find ourselves in, it's moved to a fully online model. So actually there's loads and loads of Viking content, and that's going to be all kinds of things. It's going to be stories, talks, demonstrations, and even one or two bits of comedy as well, all mixed in there as part of what we're calling that Jorvik Viking thing that's going to run between the 15th and the 20th of February. So you can find that online, and a great deal of it is free to access.
And what's the address they would go to find that?
That's jorvikthing.com. So we're looking at what we can do to boost our online presence, really. But I would always recommend that if you can't make Jorvik your first port of call, then you can have a look at our website, and you'll find lots of interesting material on there. In the way of other things, I mean, you can take your pick, really, can't you? It's whatever sort of Vikings you fancy looking at. The book I'm reading to my children at the moment is The Saga of Eric the Viking by Terry Jones of Monty Python.
The Python?
Yeah. And it's a book I read myself a few years ago. It's a children's book, but I only read it for the first time a couple of years ago, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's essentially like a long fairy tale, but with Viking trappings. And it's a nice evocation of a Viking world. Now, the illustrations have Vikings with horned helmets and winged helmets and all that sort of thing, but, you know, who cares? What's a Viking at the end of the day? It's sort of whatever you want it to be, in a way. And I do like the saga of Eric the Viking.
So just one more time, that is jorvikthing.com, where you can find all of the stuff, because it sounds great, this festival. Like, I've got the website open here. You've got an evening with Einar Selvik.
Yeah, so he's the chap who composed much of the music for the Vikings TV series, and I think he's got quite a following amongst Viking fans, but also fans of sort of metal music and that kind of thing. But he's been a supporter of the Viking Festival for a good few years now.
And when you are open in the future, what's the accessibility like at Jorvik? Like, do you have ramps and audio tours for those who have problems with sight? What's it like for that kind of stuff?
Well, we've recently won an award for our work towards accessibility.
Hey, well done.
So we do pride ourselves on being an accessible attraction. So yes, visitors will find lots of provision, and the best way to find out how to make the visit meet your requirements is to have a look online at the various resources that we have on there. So that's for all kinds of audiences can have a look on there and see how we can best meet their requirements.
How
Brilliant.
young would you say is too young to be coming? Like, if I've got a 2-year-old, are they going to be... Well, not 2, because they're just... Nothing's good for a 2-year-old. But, like, 5? Is there stuff that's, like, quite entertaining?
Yes, well, Jorvik's always had a ride, and who doesn't like going on a ride? So that's a ride around the reconstruction of the Viking era landscape. So that's fun for anybody.
Yeah.
Smells like poop.
It smells like poop.
It does when Will visits.
And also our interactive Viking team as well. So they are very adept at chatting to visitors of all ages and of all backgrounds, really. So I think we certainly would like to think that we're a fun and educational visit for people of all kind, all ages, all backgrounds. So I would recommend a visit to people young and old.
And jorvikthing.com. What like social medias do you have, you personally, and also the centre?
Oh, now you're asking. I think they're at Jorvik Viking, and I think I'm at Chris Tuckley on Twitter.
Great. Go and give them both a follow.
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody
It's been a pleasure,
watching,
thank you.
I give you the wonderful Dr. Chris Tuckley. Thank you for watching another episode of the National Treasures interview series with me, Laura Lex.
And me, still me, Will Duggan.
We're very grateful for you coming back. You will know that we already have one video up with the wonderful Dr. Kate Stevenson chatting about Gladstone's Land, and we will be putting up a new video every Sunday. Obviously, this is a bit of a new venture for us. We're branching out from the podcasting because of COVID, etc. So we really need all the help we can get. If you can like this video and comment underneath, it just helps it show up in more people's "you might like this" suggestions. And if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, it's all super helpful for us getting these videos off the ground.
I want to be one of those YouTubers that goes in like boxes. I want to fight some teenager who plays Twitch. So do like and subscribe so I can be a YouTube guy.
What are you talking about?
YouTube guys, they box each other now. KSI box Logan Paul. Will Duggan's going to box, I don't know, Hugh Fearnley-Whittinstall or something. Point is, like and subscribe.
And please sign up to the Patreon so that when Will knocks his face in fighting children, I still have an income. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at TreasuresPod, and you can email us with suggestions, or if you'd like to come on and be interviewed, at nationaltreasurespodcast@gmail.com.
That's everything.